This is the OnePlus 8 and it's been my daily driver for the past 2 years. And honestly, this has got to be the first phone I've been massively let down by. So without further ado, this is my OnePlus 8 review. Now, I'm not trying to say the phone has bad hardware. In fact, it's the best you can get in 2020. But more or less the user experience has been pretty bad. And that's the only reason why I still use the iPhone 7 till date as a second phone. And if you haven't seen my video on why I still use it in 2022, click here to watch it. So I've structured this video into the good and the bad. So with that, let's start out with design. And I'm gonna be honest here, I am someone who usually hates big phones, but this is probably one of the best feeling big phones I've held in a long time. That sounded too wrong. Now, phones which are at this size would feel like a chore to hold, but the curved front and back make it easier to hold alongside the narrow display, which makes the width of the phone comparable to a smaller phone like the iPhone 11 Pro or something. It's actually a pretty light phone for how big it is. It's under 180 grams, but I still drop it consistently, mostly due to it being big, or I'll be flipping it around. Not something a sane person would be doing. The phone is well built. It's a glass sandwich, it's sturdy, the left has the volume rocker, and the right has the alert slider and the power button. It's funny that OnePlus is the only brand who offers the alert slider on the Android side, whereas we have been having alert sliders on iPhones since the beginning. The buttons are really clicky, the haptics are really good for an Android phone, actually very close to an iPhone. There are stereo speakers on the top and bottom and they sound really good. It does have Dolby Atmos support as well, which is good. Rounding it all off, the USB-C port, SIM card slot, microphone and the speakers are at the bottom, and at the top this is secondary microphone. At the back there's a triple camera array with the ultra wide, wide and macro. On the front there's a display which has surprisingly symmetrical bezels, though there's a slight chin at the bottom, and the hole punch cut out at the left corner for the front camera. Now, it does lack wireless charging and an official IP rating, but according to OnePlus, it is water resistant, so I really don't trust it near water. The design aesthetic as a whole is pretty simple, with no crazy notch, cutouts or camera bumps or whatever. Does it look boring? Yes, but it's at least built well enough, in my opinion. Now, let's take a look at the display. There's a 6.55-inch 1080p 90Hz AMOLED display, which is really good. It's a joy to watch content on, with it having really good color reproduction and good peak brightness. But I do have a small nitpick with it. It's that it's very saturated at high brightness, and this is noticeable under bright sunlight. I don't really like the curved display as well. I do get a lot of accidental palm touches, and it just makes the phone hard to use in my opinion. The 90Hz display, it's pretty good if you're coming from a 60Hz display, but with a lot of newer phones coming out of the 120Hz display, it's good enough but not the best that's there. And if you've used a 120Hz display, this does feel a little bit slow. The bottom houses the in-display fingerprint scanner, which is placed at where your thumb would naturally rest at, and it's pretty fast. I've never had issues with it most of the time. Nevertheless, it's a good display and you'll be basically nitpicking to find issues with it. Let's talk about what's under the hood. As it's the tradition with OnePlus phones, it packs the best that's there each here. And for 2020, it was the Snapdragon 865 paired with 8 gigs of RAM, which is still fast enough for 2022 actually. But it's still beating most mid-range chips, and the difference between it and the newer 8 Gen 1 are pretty minimal. And it does occasionally heat up, but that's under heavy tasks with multiple heavy apps on the background or an intense gaming session. You can throw any heavy task at it and it'll still complete it without any major hiccups. And the Snapdragon 865, it does support 5G, but that's good for future proofing honestly. 4G on the other hand, it's been pretty good, so you're covered on that ground at least. I'm really not gonna touch a lot about the performance, cause if I'm right, I barely max out this phone. Performance has always been a strong point of OnePlus phones. So yeah, it's a no-brainer that the OnePlus 8 is pretty fast. The battery life though has been really good. Even after 2 years, I still get a full day's worth of use, but with heavier tasks, it does plummet quickly. My use includes listening to music with wireless earphones, a lot of YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, browsing with mobile data on in most cases, with the hotspot running in as well sometimes. When I first got the phone, my battery life ranged around with 6 to 7 hours of screen on time, and it does still hold up at 6 hours now, which is quite impressive for a 2-year-old phone. While it does lack wireless charging, that's where Warp Charge 30 comes in, and it saves the day. It gets the phone from 0 to 100 in less than an hour and a day's worth of use in like 30 minutes. So up till now everything sounded good, right? What's the beef then? Well, there are two things that I've not touched upon yet, and that's the reason I hate the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus as a whole now. Starting with the cameras. Now you may wonder what's wrong with it. It packs what most 2019 and 2020 phones had, and it should be good, right? For the most part, yes. It has a 16 megapixel ultra wide, a 48 megapixel wide, and a 2 megapixel macro camera on the back. And at the hole punch in the front, there's a 16 megapixel front camera. And for this review, I'm actually not gonna consider it a macro camera at all, because in my opinion, it's quite pointless. Here are some photos I've taken with it. To be honest, in the last 2 years, I've only taken like 5 photos. The wide and ultra wide cameras are pretty good. On daylight, it has sharp focus, good color, and mostly accurate exposure. But HDR seems very inconsistent in some situations, and skin tones often turn out to be very inaccurate. During the night, the photos do turn out great, surprisingly, and that's due to nightscape, which is pretty good. It's very comparable to a Pixel 5. Video is good on broad daylight, but as the light goes down, it starts getting really grainy, and when it involves human subjects, it messes up the skin tones a lot. Here's the iPhone 7 compared to the OnePlus 8, and the iPhone 7 destroys the OnePlus 8 any day in terms of color reproduction and overall quality. The front camera though, it's bad. Daylight or low light, it always messes up skin tones. Even with beautification turned off, it still applies them, and the exposure is turned up to 11 for some reason. And the video is limited to 1080p 30 fps, and it's pretty bad. For some reason the OnePlus 8 is actually cropped in, and I don't know why, but the iPhone 7 seems to give me a wider field of view. It's totally weird. While taking photos, the OnePlus 8 seems to have a wider field of view, but I don't know, in terms of video, the iPhone trumps it. Now you may tell me that it's a OnePlus phone and they're generally known to have subpar cameras. But ever since the OnePlus 7 and even now with the OnePlus 10 Pro, they seem to be hyping up the cameras a lot, and they always fail to live up to the hype. Now with the newer phones having Hasselblad camera tuning, it's not really gonna save them. The only saving grace here is the Google camera mod, and for photos it's pretty great, but the ultra wide doesn't work in many situations, and the video is way more grainy compared to the stock camera. To be honest with you, the camera isn't horrible by any means, but compared to many phones in its price range, it's pretty bad. And since I mostly use phones to shoot all my videos, I do find it annoying that I can't use the OnePlus 8 easily in my workflow. It always brings up some issue or the other when I'm trying to shoot a video. But it doesn't end with the camera, trust me. So when the phone launched, it came out with OxygenOS 10. It lived up to what OnePlus phones generally offered, which was clean and close to stock Android experience, with a few features here and there, but it was pretty great. But the start of a downfall started with OxygenOS 11, which kinda turned away from stock Android and started mimicking One UI in a few aspects, but it was bug-ridden, with there being a lot of bugs here and there, and it was pretty infuriating to use on a daily basis, but it is still clean and fast. To be honest with you, I started hating the OnePlus 8 ever since OxygenOS 11. But it got even worse with OxygenOS 12, which it's not even OxygenOS, it's basically ColorOS with color removed from it and oxygen slapped onto it. What a creative way to explain OxygenOS 12, you know? And I'm not even gonna lie, this is the most inconsistent Android skin I've used. There are a few elements of OxygenOS here and there, but mixed with ColorOS 12. And it's like OnePlus barely put any effort into at least changing up the way it looks. Even though OxygenOS 11 was bug-ridden, it still did look simple and aesthetically pleasing to the eye. OxygenOS 12 doesn't, and it misses Android 12's key feature, Material U theming, which adapts to your wallpaper and changes the color of the entire operating system to look consistent. It does have it on a few Google apps, but the core user elements are not based on it. Now, I'm not trying to say OxygenOS 12 is bad. In fact, it's way more stable and has better animations overall. But the simplicity and the overall consistency that OxygenOS 10 and 11 had are gone. Okay, I'm midway through editing this video and I forgot to include this one annoying thing that I've been facing since OxygenOS 11, and it's gotten worse with OxygenOS 12. And that's missing notifications. Let's say I get a notification on Instagram, WhatsApp or Telegram, and I'll receive the notification 10 minutes late, or I'll not even receive it at all. And it's not just with messages, even my emails. I never get my emails on time, or I never get my emails in the first place. I have to open Gmail and refresh to get my email every single time. It's quite annoying and it happens on a daily basis. And that's one of the reasons why I still carry the iPhone 7 in my back pocket, since I don't mess my notifications even on low power mode. It's quite reliable in that case. Also, it's currently raining and it's very windy. It's amazing to record in this situation. But anyways, back to the video. And the sad thing is that OnePlus phones were known for their software. I bought the OnePlus 8 and a lot of people bought OnePlus phones mainly due to OxygenOS, since it was close to stock Android. And it was generally regarded as one of the best Android skins out there. OxygenOS set OnePlus apart as a whole compared to many Chinese brands, and now there isn't a defining factor for OnePlus phones anymore. More or less, OnePlus phones are just another phone with a variation of ColorOS like Oppo or Realme phones. Even the recent phones by OnePlus are just rebranded Oppo or Realme phones. So what's even OnePlus offering over them? Nothing. But fingers crossed for OxygenOS 13, as it's supposedly gonna be based on the older OxygenOS codebase instead of ColorOS, and it's gonna look similar to stock Android. I've said this before and I'll say it once again, using this phone makes me want to use my iPhone 7 even more. Do I still recommend the OnePlus 8 in 2022? If you're fine with OxygenOS 12, then yes, it's still a good phone. But if you're someone who's buying this on the promise of OnePlus offering good software experience, then that's a no. As for what I'm going to do with the OnePlus 8, I'm going to retire it as my daily driver. But that's for another video, and that's going to be a special one. And honestly, that's about it. There's a saying where you should never buy a piece of tech based on future promises. And I am one of those clowns who bought the OnePlus 8 based on future promises. That's been it. Thank you for watching. This is Sankew, and I'll see you in the very next video. Peace.